You just showed me data saying that maybe e-commerce is in the best place it has ever been, like objectively, definitively, certainly. Am I understanding that correctly?
Okay, well, I guess it depends on how we look at that, right? Okay. Definitely not best in terms of, are we looking at like 2020 year-over-year growth, 2021 versus
2020 doesn't count.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if we look at a few factors, I think it's actually in a really good spot. Like in terms of like percentage of the economy, it's the best it's ever been.
Okay, so let's clarify exactly what you mean by that, because this is a stat that I point to all the time. Yep. I think what you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, is as a percentage of total U.S. retail,
yes,
more retail is bought online now than ever before. So online relative to brick and mortar.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this to me is something that people just don't take seriously enough. It is just so much easier when 2.5x and soon to be 3x in the next 10 years or over the next couple of years. So anyways, on a 10-year timeline, I think it's like between 2 and 3x the number of people or the amount of retail that happens online is happening relative to brick and mortar. That is, I think it was like 7% of total U.S. commerce 10 or 12 years ago was happening online, and now it's like 17% with no signs of slowing down. There was a big spike for COVID and not. And I'll try to get that the graph of that on screen. Yeah. I don't know if you have one you like, but we can follow up afterwards. But
I'm sure it's the Fred one. I think that I always look at. It's probably someone that you look at, but
the Fred one.
I think it's Fred. Yeah.
Okay, you might have to send me that. Okay, great. Because I know the data because I've looked at it. But yeah. So anyway, so walk back through that a little bit more. I cut you off, but keep talking about that.
No, and I don't have that in front of me right now, but I believe the numbers is what you said, like around 17%, and it's now. So what happened was in 2020 we saw a massive spike when everything shut down and everything started going through online purchases. Not everything, obviously, but a lot more started going through online purchases, and then there was the dip. And now we've kind of come back up. And if you look at the trend line, basically we're back on the trend line. And so, yeah, I think objectively speaking, we can look at e-commerce and say like that there is more being processed online than there ever has been in the past. And that trend is going to continue. So I think that's one factor that I'd look at where I'd say that things are good. The other one, this is a new indicator, so I can't look at this and say like
almost everybody. Sorry, I want to get to that in a second. Almost everybody recognizes that TAM, total addressable market, is really important when they talk about something like the category they're in, right? Like if you're in fitness apparel, if you're one of the companies like Simple Modern or something like that selling water bottles, everybody in the US uses a water bottle. So your TAM is virtually endless, to say nothing of worldwide possibilities. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But people underestimate that. They'll all be like, oh, TAM is so important. TAM is so important for your category. And then they will completely write it off when it comes to like online sales. Now, one of the things that implies is that omnichannel still, there's still like a really big advantage to like growing your business into brick and mortar at some point, right? Because there's still 80% of it happening there.
Yeah.
And that is why that's a real growth lever for brands as they grow D2C. But for a long time, you could sell a lot of stuff to a lot of people online in a way that is easier now than it used to be. And I take as ultimate evidence of this the fact that there are just so many more big e-commerce businesses now than there were when I started. It's just not even close. I just talk to them all the time. 8-figure businesses don't even surprise me anymore. There was a time where it was like shocking to see an 8-figure business on D2C.
It's true.
Do you remember those days? Were you in the game in those days?
Yeah. I got started in 2012 in the e-commerce space. So yeah, I remember, at the time, a big brand for me was a brand doing a few million a year in revenue.
Totally.
And that was like, if I had a client that I was working with that was big, it was typically 3 to 10 million. First time I ever worked with a brand doing 10 million plus was probably 2016 would be my guess. Now
and it was crazy. I've referenced this before, but I remember the first Google Analytics. I don't think it's a problem for me to say who it was either. It was Diff Eyewear. I remember the first time I saw Diff Eyewear's. We're doing some agency work for them, and I remember seeing their Google Analytics, and actually Taylor pulled it up because we were like pitching them at CTC, and Taylor pulled it up. And he like waved me into his office, like, dude, come look at this, and they were like 15 or something, like maybe 20, I don't know. And it was like, wow. And now it's like, meh.
Yeah. I tried to think there was a brand that a lot of people would know, and I don't have a close relationship with them, so I don't know if mentioning, but
this is like 6 years ago for Diff or something. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. these guys it was another eyewear company. And they were kind of up and coming in 2015, I think it was. I was doing some conversion rate optimization work for them, and they were on it wasn't Shark Tank, but it was a show like that. And just like watching their revenue spike over like through the course of the show and that whole process. Yeah. It wasn't like there's so many brands I work with that do a million plus in a day, 10 million plus in a day on Black Friday these days. But I want to say it was like $600K that they did in a day. And it was like a shocking number to me. I just couldn't believe that they did $600,000 in a day. So yeah.
It's crazy. Okay. What was your other indicator? I'm sorry, I cut you off again because I want to belabor this point.
Yeah. I think the other indicator we're looking at right now is this direct to consumer confidence index that we built with Common Thread Collective. And that is
never heard of them.
That is 2 years old at this point. Next month it'll be 2 years old. So we've been tracking this data for 2 years, and we actually saw a dip the last couple of weeks pretty significantly. But up until this point, consumer sentiment's the highest it's been in years, and that's pretty interesting. I think that's a good sign of future buying as well. So I think when I think about like, is e-commerce good? It's not just like the trend that we've been on, but also like, what do we have to indicate that the future is going to be good? I love the D2C CI. I think it's an unparalleled tool. So this might be a good chance for people to understand a little bit more about who you are and what your place in that is. Yeah. Hopefully they've read the show notes, but we did the Joe Rogan style roll right into it intro here. So, but Jeremiah Prummer, you tell people what your role and what No's role is. Yep. And what data you have access to, and then what the D2C CI is, and then let's keep talking about what you just said, because I actually think this is a very big deal, and people should understand this metric. I actually remember working with a client at one point when the D2C CI went way down over a longer period of time, and they struggled, and I kept showing that to them, saying like, hey, this is like, you actually have to reckon with this. This is real objective data about the state of people's buying right now. Yep. And I think it's a really thing. Like everybody should go subscribe to that right now. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And okay, so just a little bit more context about that. So a couple years ago, Taylor Holiday from Common Thread Collective and myself kind of sat down and he'd been looking at the consumer confidence index and how that correlated with the effectiveness of ad spend. And so we were looking at this and the idea was, what could we do to actually build something that was representative of our industry, not just the macro economy? Because there is a bit of a difference potentially in online shopping versus in-person shopping. There's a different type of person who buys online than the person who's buying in store sometimes. And so if we could actually tailor it for online shopping, it would be more valuable and useful. And then the other challenge with the consumer confidence index is that it's a once a month data point. It's not very actionable when it's happening one time a month or like 3 weeks retroactively, right? So by the time you're actually seeing the data, it's 6 weeks old most of the time, like 4 to 6 weeks old. And so that was the idea. And so what we did is we went to at No Commerce, we run surveys for e-commerce brands. And so we actually built an experience called Automated Insights that brands can opt into, where we ask a bunch of different questions, some of them for the direct to consumer confidence index, some of them just for like broader understanding of how your brand fits into the ecosystem. And we rolled that out and started collecting this data. And so we ask a series of questions that are basically like, the intent of the questions is to understand how somebody perceives their buying behavior having changed over recent time, how they think it's going to change in the future, and also like how they perceive the economy in the moment. And those are the data points that we're leveraging in this context. And then we've got a little bit of stuff in terms of, we've got like the zip code of the person who fills out the survey. We've got a couple of data points like that where it's all anonymized data, but it's also, it can be tied back to a geo, for instance. And so this is really cool because then we can start to break down this data over time. And so we've been tracking this now 2 years. Thousands of people answer this survey every week. And so it's a pretty good replacement for the consumer confidence index.
Another INTELLIGEMS win with an actual client of mine. I want to tell you about a split test we ran that was massive for us. And that was, we split test cutting the price of customization on a product in half. Went from $10 to $5 monogramming type deal. And we decided to see how that would affect the take rate on people's upsell, basically take on monogramming. And so we use INTELLIGEMS, split our traffic, and then measured it, of course, based off of the actual profit difference. And it made a huge difference. When we cut the price in half, the conversion rate basically doubled. And so then the game was, did we actually have enough margin? Was the costs in doing this better? We actually, for that business, may even change how we do our customization at the level of our 3PL so we can generate more purchases like this. We'll play out all these things. Like, would you rather have people take more monograms? Does it increase their conversion rate across the board if they have access to cheaper monogramming on the product? All these questions come up, but it was a huge difference in behavior that we were able to get at because we used INTELLIGEMS. INTELLIGEMS is the best CRO software that I know of. I'm running tests constantly with most of my clients across all kinds of elements of our sites, of our stores. That includes like total website, larger tests. That includes PDP tests that we're running. That includes landing page tests. We're splitting traffic between PDPs, collection pages, home pages, and landing pages. Doing all of that post-click, which is the best way to run landing page split tests if you're running meta ads. And we're measuring it all based on actual profit, not just conversion rate, AOV, whatever. Actually getting the profit information in the store into that test. There's just no other tool as good as INTELLIGEMS. You should be using it. You should be testing the needle movers all the time. I sent out in my newsletter last week another example of a test you should be running, which is, should you be giving your 10% off discount to your clients or to your customers that nearly every brand does for first purchase customers. INTELLIGEMS is great. INTELLIGEMS.io/Andrew-Ferris-podcast. You don't have to remember all that. The link is in the show notes. Use the code FARRIS20, FARIS20, to get 20% off each of your first 3 months with INTELLIGEMS. Go get INTELLIGEMS now. So it's real time.
Yep.
It's from you, the survey data, because you guys are asking like attribution questions, among other things, right? And no. Mm-hmm. And then you're also getting this other set of data beyond the attribution question about like, what are people actually thinking about the economy? Yep. Like, what kinds of questions are you asking people?
In that context, I forget the exact phrasing, but it's essentially like, how have you spent more or less in the last 30 days than normal? Okay. Do you expect to spend more or less in the next 90 days than normal?
Classic consumer confidence questions.
Same questions that are on the consumer confidence index, right?
Great, but you're getting it in real time.
Yep.
Okay, and then you're collecting that data all the time, so it's constantly updating. And then CTC provides what?
They're basically grabbing that data, and then what they're doing is they're actually mapping it against return on ad spend data. So they're looking at like the ad performance across their set of data. And then we're looking at those questions individually. So, like getting economic sentiment by itself. So the question of like, do you expect the economy to be better or worse in the future? That's one of the questions. So we can actually look at those questions independently. But then also they can map the ad spend performance data against us. And so the actual score that gets published factors in ad spend performance. And so the idea being that we can actually predict with some level of accuracy future ad spend performance based off of that data. And it's been, I would say, like, it's not incredible, but it's like 95 to 98%. The predicted score ends up being within it's like 95 to 98% accurate. So it's pretty close. That's still like a decent margin of error in that context. So I think there's things we can do over time to improve it, but it's still like close. And so, we oftentimes will see the drop coming before it actually comes, or we'll see the spike coming before it actually comes. And that's really where the value is.
So to come back then, you brought up this data point to come back to what the DCCI shows you. And you were saying the D2C consumer confidence right now, and this will release pretty soon, so it should be people getting it. We're recording in February. What you were saying, it's the highest it's ever been, or it was at least a week ago or something?
Yeah. So the absolute peak of, just looking at, this is actually the most interesting question to me, is the question of, do you think the economy will be better or worse in the future? Mm-hmm. The spread of that, like better versus worse, hit its peak 2 weeks ago. So it's actually dropped now.
So right at the end of January.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually dropped now, but it's still substantially higher than it was. Even looks like we're still higher than we were around the time of the election. So anyway, we've seen a massive bump since the election. And what's actually interesting there is this isn't a surprise, I don't think, but it's cool to actually see this play out in the data. There is a pretty massive difference in sentiment by geography. So states that lean red are very positive on the economy right now. States that lean blue are not so positive. And
are they actively negative? States that are blue?
No, they're both actually slightly positive. Like both are up from what they were a year ago, certainly. Yeah. But like they're what we saw pre-election, and there's data on this if you go check it out on Twitter, and I'll share some of that.
And there's links here to Jeremiah's Twitter where you can see some of this stuff. There's also to his LinkedIn, and then also in the show notes here, there's just a link to the D2C index where you can find kind of all the resources here. So you just go follow that stuff. It's a different, and in my view, much better resource than almost anything like it in e-commerce that I'm aware of. Like people love to pontificate about is e-commerce bad or good, including yours truly. I've done multiple episodes on this, but like I think this is sort of like one snapshot of objectivity that's unlike anything else out there for that.
Yeah, and the one thing I think it's worth touching on when we talk about like is e-commerce good? I do think if you look at the total TAM, it's good. It's going up. The TAM is growing all the time. The possibility for a brand to drive massive amounts of revenue is really good. And I think like if you look at certain categories, you see that even more obviously than others. So for example, like I think True Classic is a really cool story of how a brand came in. What was it, 2021 they launched? It hasn't been very long at all. Like they launched with, and the story is it's bootstrapped, and I forget what it was, a $3,000 initial PO or something that they've turned into.
Insane.
I think the last number I heard was something like 150 million in revenue. I think was the expectation for last year. So I have no idea what those numbers look like exactly, but we're talking like easily like in the 9 figures, maybe mid 9 figures at this point, from one moment in time. But the reason that works is obviously the execution has been phenomenal. Like not trying to diminish that at all, but like I think that only works in a TAM like t-shirts where you've got like something
endless.
Yeah, where like everybody's buying it. Your market is literally every single person. Obviously, you want to scale it back a little bit for like the specific type of customer you're trying to speak to. But like there's to your point, it's endless. Like that is such a massive market, and you couldn't do that with I'll use katana, the
mini katana, right? Yeah,
the samurai sword.
Isaac Medeiros.
Right? Like how many people are buying a samurai sword? So like I do think there's an interesting thing here where I think although this TAM is growing massively, different businesses are going to see very different results depending on which product category they're in, how long they've been around, their level of execution. And then obviously now we've got this problem where like it just is harder to acquire customers. It's more expensive, I should say, to acquire customers now than it used to be. And less data access and all that kind of stuff. So I do think I guess the one thing I want to say is better as a category, yes, but I also do think there's a massive amount of variance in the outcomes here.
Every average contains within it a really wide range of distributions, right? Averages are evil in that respect. Like they don't tell you very much, but I think but part of why I like speaking in the average here is that like sometimes like other channels for this discussion naturally select for different things, and they also have different incentives in terms of being right or whatever. Like I also think there's a big question about like what is good, like because like sometimes I hear people complaining about like e-commerce isn't that good anymore, and they seem to be running $20 million a year businesses, and I'm like, well, like how easy did you think it was to build a $50 million a year business? Like what do you mean it isn't good if you can't get it past 20? Like that's pretty good. A $20 million a year business is profitable, but you bootstrapped, you own 100% equity, and it's pretty good. Like so like it's hard for me to hear that the idea that like that's something wrong or something. I recognize that it's hard. I don't think I would ever say it was easy, but I just think like there's something like that. And I mean, to your True Classic example, I'm currently wearing a Fresh Clean Threads shirt. It's pretty much where I buy all of mine. I don't know what you're wearing there, but it looks like one of the big guys here. Maybe it's True Classic, maybe it's Built, maybe it's Cuts. I don't know. But True Classic is just one of them. Is my point. There's a bunch of them who are doing real revenue on solid color t-shirts. I think the other thing that reflects, and this also comes back to the averages thing, is like what I see happening is that as the industry gets more intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
There's also a thing happening where I think more people are realizing what makes what brand has the characteristics to be a better or worse e-commerce brand specifically for that distribution channel. And so like what I mean is like I worked for a long time with Curie deodorant. I had Sarah on the show a long time ago. And, you know, at some point, I think the last I had talked to her and she had said this, right, they sold into every Walmart door. And now they're adding, you know, other major retailers. And I don't know if they can say that publicly or not, but like, you know, they have really shifted their focus from being a D2C brand and seeing a lot of initial traction there to being a mass retail brick and mortar brand. And for me, that makes perfect sense. I know what the margin is in deodorant. It's okay. I know what the LTV is in deodorant, unless you get subscribers, which is really hard to do in women's clean deodorant. It's okay. But you know where people buy a lot of deodorant? Walmart and Target and like, you know, whatever, places like that. And so like, the ability to scale the business and that channel for that brand, D2C became a way to sort of validate and then get into those doors. But then the actual path to scaling for a brand like that really is brick and mortar, and they ought to focus on that. You know, Amazon's going to be insanely competitive. Like it's just like all those things, you know. And so it starts to be the case to me that what brands really ought to be thinking about, this is sort of hopefully one of the ways people can make this actionable, is if you have the right profile for D2C to make sense for you as a channel, you can ride it for a really, really long time. And it's a really good business. And you should pay attention to all of the like things people are saying about like how to avoid landmines to step on along the way. But like, listen, if you're selling supplements that are subscription, there is no better delivery mechanism. Like the idea of getting a supplement, if you want to take it every day for 30 days, every 30 days, then getting that thing sent to your house, subscribed, where you never have to think about it or go to a store and buy it, is actually the ideal way to consume that product. And it's also high margin and reasonably cheap to ship, usually for the brand, and they can track your data, and it's really easy to go like manipulate everything as you need. Like it's just a great way for both the consumer and the brand to interact with one another. So that's why there's a million supplement brands, because it's actually a great delivery mechanism for that particular category. And you know, the same thing you said with like basic t-shirts. Like I don't really want to go to a store and try this on, especially like it's the way men shop for clothes a lot of times, especially like
that's true.
Great, it's going to fit, it's at a price that I like. I found the fit. The reason I buy Fresh Clean guys every time is because they have I'm 6 foot almost 4, and they have tall mediums. And you know what? That cut of that shirt fits me. I never want to go to a store to buy it. I just want to click a button and have it show up to my house. It's the same thing. Like it fits so well for the model. And I think this is what brands have to think about is, okay, the thing works. The model works in the aggregate. Consumers are buying, online is growing, all those things. But does my particular brand make sense for this distribution channel? And if it does, I think then there's a really big opportunity. If you are thinking about how to build your e-commerce team while staying lean, while assigning people to the right projects in the right places, there is no better place to look than my friends at More Staffing in the Philippines. More Staffing will help you get connected to the best Filipino talent. Don't make the mistake that everybody makes with hiring Filipino talent, which is thinking about it as just cheap VA type talent. That is not all you have access to in the Philippines. Instead, you should be thinking about how to get incredible talent at every level of your organization, like all the way up to the executive level. And I mean that by hiring in the Philippines with More Staffing. They're an incredible staffing agency. They really care. I've spent time in the Philippines in person with these people. They have come to my house in Los Angeles. Like I love them. We've been working together for a long time. They're great people who will do a great job for you. They will also give you a 1-year placement guarantee. So if you place talent from the Philippines in your business with More Staffing and they don't last for a year, they will help you find a new replacement for that person for free, which is like way longer than what almost any other staffing agency will give you. The standard recruiting firm thing is like 3 months, I think. So More Staffing is just great. Go to morestaffing.co/AF. Morestaffing.co/AF is the place to get started with them. You should be considering hiring in the Philippines if you are growing your business, because not only is it a great value proposition for both you and talent in the Philippines, but you now have a reliable person to help you locate that talent in More Staffing. Trust me on that. I work with them. I've staffed my business with them. I love them. Go to morestaffing.co/AF. Get started today.
I totally agree with that. And I think one thing I think is interesting that you just called out too is there's a difference in buying behavior depending on who your target customer is too. So for example, with the t-shirts, like, obviously some men like to go to the store and shop, right? But for me, I'm like, okay, if I find something that works, I actually just want to buy the same thing over and over. and I don't want to have to think about it. Like that's my style. And so, and that's again, not true of everybody, but like that's the way that I shop. And so if you can identify that in a customer, then your delivery mechanism to that customer in the context of e-commerce becomes really easy. And yeah, you're just trying to like, it becomes more of like an LTV and replenishment play for that person. Whereas that may not work for somebody else. So, and actually like one thing that's worth just kind of noting real quick too, like that's actually a big piece of what we're trying to help solve with at No, is trying to identify like how are certain segments of customers different from others using data.
How do you guys do that?
The easiest thing is just asking questions, right? So like a good example would be, I'll just give this example because it's
please.
One, but there's a company
Jeremiah, I'm sorry. One of the things I'm thinking most about right now is that I may have been making a massive marketing mistake for a long time by talking to men and women the same way. Like again, there are overlapping bell curves in the way men and women shop, and it's of course, there are exceptions to all of these rules. But the averages do distribute different in terms of some behaviors differently in different places, and your t-shirt example is one of them. Like the way that you and I both have expressed that we shop for this is just really different than the way fashion or apparel works for women usually, etc. So thinking about that a little bit differently. That's like one segment I've been thinking, but I'm really just beginning to think about this a little bit more and go like, how should this play into my tactics and strategies, both like at the level of pure tactics and like broader strategy. And so anyway, so I'm really curious. So how do you guys get at different segments? Because I'm sure that's not the only one you could think of, right? People talking about this like Gen Z versus millennials and stuff like that too. So yeah, what do you guys do to get at that?
Yeah. So like one very simple question is just to basically be like, well, let's use a t-shirt example real quick. So let's say I want to understand, is somebody going to buy multiple different styles from multiple different brands, or are they looking for the perfect t-shirt that's going to fit them and they're just going to stick with that? You can actually ask that person a question like that and basically, get at the idea of, I don't know exactly how to phrase the question in this context, but something to the effect of, how do you like to shop? And you just start to dive in a little bit. And, the options might be, I like to go to the store and try a lot of things on. And another option might be, I like to buy the thing that I know works for me, that that has worked in the past. And you just kind of give them a few options and let them self-select into what that is that is their buying preference, right? And so then I think the way that I would then treat that is, if you're True Classic, for instance, and you've got somebody who says that they like to shop and try a bunch of different things, then maybe I'm going to put them into email marketing flows that are a little bit more oriented around new product discovery. Whereas the person who's like, I just want the perfect thing, really you're trying to figure out, okay, if this person's bought the same thing twice, that's all we should be informing them about. And how do we get them to buy that same thing on a more regular cadence and not go shop from a competitor, right? So that's the way that I would think about that.
I would probably turn that insight around back towards my marketing, actually. And I would say something like, I would try to build a funnel. I mean, I think actually True Classic has done this, right? Like I've at points had, and I'm going to have again, I think, Fermat as a sponsor on this show. And like Fermat has this like delivery mechanism where they have like stores that are, you could sort of like self-contained bundles in a sort of like in a self-contained shop that doesn't take somebody into the full website experience. And I think one of the things they've said is that they work very well, very often for men's basics, because they can basically do exactly the thing you just said, which is like, instead of having somebody go browse around a giant site, they can build like a tight funnel for that customer. And then you can message it that way and say something to the effect of, if we know there's a subset of men who want to shop this way, then we say like, hey, these are going to fit right every time. There's, whatever, $0 returns. We'll get it right. Like, I don't know, something whatever you need to say, like, and maybe the messaging would be, get the right fit every single time in less than 3 minutes, or something like that. And basically make it all about the convenience of getting this thing that I just need in my wardrobe all the time, that I don't want to spend time on, but that I can get. And so I would build my marketing messaging that way. And then, maybe on the back end of that, also think about something like an email flow or something that's like really specific to that. But this is the thing that I'm most interested in, is like, how do you speak more specifically to more specific subgroups of customers? And so anyway, that's a great example.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like this actually happened to me with True Classic on Black Friday. I was like, okay, I'm going to go shop. and then I got overwhelmed by options and I was busy and I never finished my purchase. Like I actually needed that funnel to just be like, okay, what's the one thing you're looking for? Give it to me. And then I'm going to go make it happen. It's a very interesting. It's very interesting. And the reality though, is like that behavior may not be true of the same person always. And so I think that's like going back to the ad side of things. That is where it's actually interesting, because if you can get your ad creative to speak to whatever that person's buying behavior is in that moment, and then you can push them into the right funnel for that behavior, that then is going to be extremely impactful. So yeah, I love that concept in general.
Yeah. Okay, are there other segments that you've seen people do this with? Like, what are the other like little ways that people uniquely shop? I'm just curious to go down this road a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, one example I was going to bring up, this company where we work with that sells smoke bombs, and they'll actually like literally after the checkout, they ask them what they're doing with it, and so they have people doing gender reveals, they have people doing like photographers who are buying it for photo shoots, and then they have like first responders, and so they know that the LTV of each of those use cases is massively different. If it's a gender reveal, maybe they buy 2 or 3 times ever, right? Like that's it. But they might refer you to a friend because they love the experience, and they've got
people are friends with people their same age.
Exactly. Yeah. So like that's a really great example of how that works. And then, on the flip side of that, you've got the first responders that are potentially buying this every month because they're doing something specific with it, right? They're using them as like road flares, or not road flares, but like in that sort of a context, or they're doing like trainings where they need 20 of these at a time. And so it's just like a whole different purchase flow, and those use cases actually can have a massive indication of like how the volume they'll buy, the type, even like the color variants and stuff they'll buy. Like if it's gender reveal, it's always blue or pink. That's the only colors that you sell to people. And so you can see obviously how that can work on the ad acquisition side of things. And on the downstream side of things too, in terms of how you engage with that customer post-purchase.
Yeah, that's another good example of something where you could have like a really tight funnel for these really specific groups and speak really directly.
And they do that, right? Like, they do that with gender reveal. Like there's literally like an entire portion of their website that's 100% dedicated towards gender reveal, because it's only you're usually buying a pack of 2, both boy girl. And it's like the same purchase flow and funnel, and it's really easy to set that whole thing up.
Yeah. So I have a thing about this, which is that I've thought for a long time that the "where did you hear about us" question, the attribution question for post-purchase surveys, it's not that I think it's totally useless or anything like that. It's just like one of the least interesting questions that I would use that space for, because there's opportunity cost on the space, right? So it's like there's only so many things you can get somebody to answer. Now I know some people will sit and answer questions for a long time, but like, but this has always been something that's more interesting to me. The very first post-purchase survey I ever used was when I was at FC Goods, selling wallets made out of baseball gloves. And gosh, now I'm trying to remember, was it you that I talked to way back then? Do you know? No. Maybe. Did you guys used to be called something else? Fair? No.
That's fair. Yeah. They're
okay, great. Okay, great. Sorry to bring.
No, it's fine. They're awesome. Fairing's a great tool. We kind of are different, but
great. Yeah. Okay. I remember using that, and I just asking the question with FC Goods. Like I already knew where they were coming from. They were basically coming from Meta. Like I didn't need the question to add, to answer that. The question that was more interesting to me was, is this a gift? And you could see like at different times of year how that changed, and those customers were really different from one another. And we sold the company before I could go too far with it, but that was like such a significant part of that brand that like understanding how to think about marketing to those people and following up with those people and all those things was just like a really significantly different thing based on if they were buying a gift or not, So anyway, maybe I don't know No as a tool well enough to know like if I could get both of these answered or something, but like the way I think about it is like, you can do both.
Yeah. The way that we operate is you can run lots of questions in a survey. You can do, different surveys to different customer segments, all kinds of things like that. Even based on like what they've answered in the past. So yeah, it's like, I definitely agree that like the how did you hear about us question is useful. It's most useful for brands that are, call it 50 million a year plus in revenue, spending dollars on platform
bunch
you
of
can
platforms.
think of, and they're literally
Yeah.
trying something new every
Yeah.
quarter, sometimes even more frequently than that, right? And it's like let's say you're gonna spend $100,000 on TV, and that's like such a small percentage of your budget. It's not even going to show up in terms of being incremental for your business. So having a survey in place where you can see the numbers go from 0 up to, maybe it's 2% of your revenue that's being powered by TV discovery. Like it's useful in that context. Yeah.
That's meaningful. Yeah. Totally.
But yeah, I agree with you. Like if it's, those are not the things that generally like change your business, if that makes sense, and your funnel. And the questions that are going to actually change your business strategy are ultimately more meaningful. They're also just harder because you have to be more thoughtful about it, and you have to actually like change something with the output of those questions, if that makes sense.
Do you have any examples of this, like change your business type questions?
Yeah.
I think your smoke bomb one's a good one, actually, where it's like you're isolating this. I've used the example in the past of LoomCube, who I talked to their CEO a long time ago. I thought this was a great conversation from him, but they sell like essentially LED lights for your desk. Once COVID happened in particular, right?
Yep.
They blew up for LED lighting for home offices. They did really well, but they discovered that they had a subgroup of tattoo artists who were buying their products, and that the tattoo artists really liked the lighting for these really specific reasons that was unique to them. But it ended up being like $1 million revenue line basically for them. And they built a separate funnel for them and everything like that. I always thought that was a great example of this kind of thing where it's like, a little bit like that first responder versus gender reveal thing, where it's just like same product, but really, really different use
definitely.
case.
I think really common question I've seen that's really effective is the who are you purchasing for question, because it does allow you to kind of segment customers, and it is a very different behavior for somebody who's buying a gift versus somebody who's buying for themselves. And also like the long-term revenue potential on those customers is going to be different, right? So that's one that I commonly see. One cool example I heard of, this was just before the holidays. Beekman 1802 is one of the brands we work with, and we have a case study with them where they had this gift bundle that they were selling with like this really nice packaging, and it was it was this beautiful package. And they started surveying people, and they realized that people actually just wanted the bundle. They didn't care about the packaging. And so they were spending all this money on this packaging. It was extra shipping cost, extra, just like wasted packaging. And they were actually just like taking this and dividing it up with friends. And so they completely changed that piece of the funnel. So it actually became the gift set did not come with the packaging, and you could add that on in your cart for $5 or whatever that was. And so it actually turned from they took it from a cost and transitioned it into a revenue stream. Then they were saving from wasting the packaging. And, there's a bit of an environmental play there. There's also just like a cost play, like all those things. Sure. And so those kinds of examples I think are really compelling. And that's the reality.
Do you remember what question they asked?
Oh man, I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question. It's on the case. So that's something we can share as well. But yeah, it's like those types of questions are like that one right there. That didn't change their business. But over the course of time, that's going to save them hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of dollars in profit for their business.
But it's also even more than that. My take from that would be that they had an assumption about gift packaging that directed their mental energy at some point enough to where they built gift packaging. And that's hard work. I mean, you have to go set up manufacturing and design and get samples, and it takes a long time and this effort. That's a huge lift to go do that. And then to find out that people basically don't care is like now you've got it done. So go ahead and keep it as an add-on. But to me, the win there is just knowing your customer better, because this is something I think about so much. Like all the tactics feed product and customer. At the end of the day, there's only two things happening in your business. There's a product and there's a customer. And the relationship between those two things is the business. That's the whole thing. And it's really easy. You listen to my podcast or you go follow Jeremiah on X or whatever, and you're seeing all of this stuff that all these people are doing, and there's data and there's all this stuff. You just lose sight of at some point the basic reality that there is your product and your customer, and you have to figure out how to make those two things come together. And I think that's the win at the beginning.
And actually,
is like finding out that.
Yeah,
that
and
element.
A good example of that. So one of the things we encourage brands to do is before you launch new tech, ask your customers how they're going to use it. If you're thinking about launching an app, just survey your customers and figure out if they even want an app. If you're going to launch a loyalty program, like maybe you want to do it anyways, but ask them what kind of loyalty perks they want. Don't just make assumptions about what you should be giving your customers. And I think what's really cool with that is when you are thoughtful about that, you're going to get the data to help you understand, like, should I even do this thing? But then also you're going to segment customers to then reach out to them when you do that thing. So if you find that 70% of your customers want a mobile app, don't even bother reaching out to the 30% that don't care for a mobile app. Focus your efforts on that 70% that want it. Make sure that they know about your app. Make sure you're hitting them regularly with messaging, and ignore that 30% that said, no, I don't want your app. So there's different things you can do like that, where it gives you the insight, but then also gives you the ability to action on that in the future.
It's really interesting. We're having this conversation. I'll be honest with you. I almost missed what you said at the end there, because my mind immediately started turning towards a client of mine, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're probably not talking to this subgroup of customers the right way in our marketing, because we're just not thinking enough about what they care about here. And so this is a really helpful conversation, because immediately actionable to me. I'm just curious, you had the Beekman example. Any other examples you could think of like, just to get people's thoughts started here on other ways they could use something like Know to ask this kind of question? It's funny, I brought you on here to talk state of the industry, but then but this is so helpful. Like, I love thinking about this.
Beekman was good. Man, I'm trying to think. I've like really strong cases outside of attribution, because it is honestly, like, most customers are still kind of focused on attribution.
Sure.
I think, okay, so here's an example of something that's a slightly different vein, but I think is really interesting. One of the brands we work with asked a question, basically trying to understand which competitor somebody has shopped. And what was really interesting is they asked somebody, have you ever shopped a competitor? And then when they said yes, they then asked them which one. And so they got that data, which is really interesting. And then they asked, like, why did you decide to shop with us instead? And one of the options they included on that survey was, I still buy from that other competitor. And what they found is that people that buy from competitors actually would spend more money with them than the people who didn't. And so you're actually, like, that's another really interesting insight, where, like, generally you think that what I need to do is take this customer from my competitor. But in actuality, there's a subset, and I think actually every market has this. There's a subset of, like, super buyers in an industry that are going to shop a lot of different companies and a lot of different products, because, like, they're looking for the best.
They just love the category.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like,
yeah,
that subset is actually probably the best subset for every business. And so anyway, it was just like, it's a really cool, like, that's a small subset, but just even, like, rethink how you're potentially marketing to your customers and figure out, like, how can I be attracting that subset? Because those are the ones that are going to spend the most money with me, even though they're still buying from my competitors.
Was it skincare?
No, it wasn't skincare. It was, of all things, it was silicone rings, which is
really
what I would expect, right? Like, that is one. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Anyway, yeah,
I wonder if it was specifically female customers who maybe accessorizing.
Yeah, that's a good
more?
question. I don't believe they ever dug that deeply into it, but
because. Okay, this category makes sense for this, though. I'm working this back. Obviously, I have experience in this category, right? I came from Kalo originally, right? So, but one of the things that in the early days of Kalo, we were trying to figure out was sort of like, who was going to actually accessorize with silicone rings versus who was going to wear a gray or black ring every day. I mean, I've worn this ring forever. I'm not going to change it. It doesn't matter what color shirt I'm wearing. I'm just wearing this ring. But, like, I've definitely seen, and I think it's particularly female, so not exclusively. Again, there's overlapping bell curves here. There's probably some distribution of males who do the same thing, but there's particularly customers probably who were going like, oh, like, this is, like, I like wearing it for all of the functional reasons and the convenience and lifestyle or whatever, but it's also something that's really easy and actually cheap to get different colors of and different styles of, and so I can go get a few different ones and play with them and change it with my outfit and stuff. And we always wanted those customers, so that's really interesting. But I could actually imagine. I mean, it's almost like, could you even go to the step of getting people to, like, make those recommendations to other customers of yours or something? Like, basically, like, also, right? Could you even do the really counterintuitive thing here and be like, hey, if you're Kalo, like, we got a partnership with Groove, get 20% off your, like, like, I don't know, like, that would be a crazy version of it, but like,
it might work, right? Like,
but it would be fascinating.
Because you're probably, I mean, I guess maybe you want to survey those people on the back end and make sure they're actually, like, fitting the category that you want. But there's an interesting angle there for sure. So, and Yeah.
So
I would say on the software side, I kind of see this too, right? Like there's super buyers of software, and there's there's companies that are using 8 different analytics tools, and like, are they competitive? Yes. Like for the brand that's only going to pick one of those tools, they're absolutely competitive. But for the super buyer of software, they are looking for specific things here and there, and like they're willing to pay for it because it's not that big of an expense for them ultimately, and they need that specific action item out of one of these things. So yeah.
2 things here. One of them is you've convinced me that I need to make sure we have these surveys on all of our stores and be thinking about the right question. I don't know. It's like actually making me think like, what am I doing? Why do we not have? I mean, I definitely have stores that use no for sure, but I'm not clued in enough of it to my clients. I'm not clued in enough onto what the answers are and what we're asking and if I could be using it better. Because I'm just thinking about the insights I could get for each of my clients. Would be really helpful. The other thing I was thinking of was like in a category like silicone rings, to use that example from earlier. I think this is another helpful thing to think about for operators is like, everybody's so worried about competitors, and there's a way in which competitors are bad, of course, for you, but there's also a way in which really, if you're selling silicone wedding rings, your silicone rings are not your competitors at all. The other companies, there's some of that because there's a race to the bottom on price. There's so much margin there and all that kind of stuff. But really, it's still metal rings that make up probably the vast majority of the ring buying behavior in the world. So essentially, like what you probably really want to do is think about like how you go take those guys down. And so having people who like are committed to the category is probably kind of a win for everybody. So I don't know, that could be wrong, but I remember Dave Recook talking about this with Bamboo Earth, just that like, when they do surveys of like about like people who use skincare, that's the reason I asked that question earlier. It was like basically no competitor was actually very big in terms of the total skincare market because there are so many skincare brands and customers were moving between so many of them so much that like it just is the reality of the category, and just nobody could really. And they used, I think, you guys to ask like, who else did you buy from? And nobody came up more than like a couple percentage points at the time. Well, that's something like that. It was like everybody.
Yeah,
buys
that's a
everything.
Good example of a brand that doesn't care about the attribution questions. And Dave is like 100% focused on what are the things I can unlock that are actually going to change the way that I think about my business and my customer segment and all of that. So, yeah. I think like on the silicone rings point, I mean, I never heard of it until I think Enzo was maybe the first one I heard of back in 2015, 16, something like that. And there was Kalo and then Groove, and like is like that category, even especially back then, I would think like the number one thing wasn't so much the competition between the companies. It was more so like nobody knows what a silicone ring is, and we have to tell them what that is and to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of my favorite e-commerce types of brands to start. And this is like the brand that I'm working on spinning up. I'm not quite ready to say exactly what it is yet, but I'm planning to be pretty open with it because first of all, it's one of the reasons I want to do it is so that I can share when I'm talking about things that I'm doing, I actually share examples without pissing off a client. But also though, it's sort of one of my favorite plays in e-commerce and D2C, again, as a mechanism that you can like have relatively low amounts of capital, bootstrap, and start yourself. It's the brand that I'm working on is a subcategory within a much larger existing category. So like silicone wedding rings is a subcategory within wedding rings, right? There's like a lot of examples of this. And I think it's one of the best ways to build a D2C business is to find essentially like some kind of niche subcategory. And then you can expand that out if you want to, but
Bridge wallets is an example. I know Sean will say nobody should start a wallet company, but but it's like, yeah,
exactly.
It's a subset of wallets, and wallets is, it's a ubiquitous product. So
that's right. Yeah. So, and also as somebody who has run a much smaller wallet company than Sean, I agree with that. The economics don't work that great, and nobody ever buys a second one.
Yeah, that's definitely
it's not perfect. There's some limitations. But that's definitely like part of what I'm thinking about is like, what is the subcategory within the larger category that you can like sort of carve out? Because then when you do that too, it's really nice because if there's any competitors there, they're actually barely competitors. Like they really are like helping you sort of rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. It's not totally unlike the notion of online retail as a percentage of total retail. It's like it's all retail, but like what you want is people to have a new behavior in this thing and grow.
And I'm thinking like
behavior.
Poppy and Olipop right now is a great example of that, in my opinion. Like those two companies.
Yes.
It's funny. They're like kind of like butting heads a little bit. I actually wonder if it's all just like performative, because like at the end of the day, the category is, it's Pepsi and Coke that own all of that. And me, like I don't drink soda. I will drink Olipop or Poppy, and that's
Same.
like
I love it.
Yeah,
it's delicious.
And it's like 5 grams of sugar or whatever it is. So I actually like feel okay about myself.
I'm making the exact same decision the exact same way. I turn the can around and look at the amount of sugar in it every single time. And it's available in no more places. Non-alcoholic beer is another example of this, where it's like, growing that category. And this is actually first how I think, if I understand correctly, I think first how Red Bull came on the scene was basically like, especially the distribution mechanism there is a helpful thing to think about, right? Like for them, the key thing was like opening up convenience stores, I think. And if you think about the way convenience stores work, right, they have a limited amount of shelf space. And so the whole notion is like, can they turn that shelf space into more dollars in their pockets? Because you just have to maximize the square footage that you have, right? And so what something like Red Bull does is like, they take a space that was set for a 70-cent can of soda or whatever at the time, whenever they launched, and they turn it into a place that you can get $2.50 for, in a category that didn't previously exist. And so now it's like, soft drinks, but it's not just a soft drink. It's like, it's something else. It's like that kind of thing can be really, really powerful. I think if brands, if operations
definitely.
Right.
I forget exactly what the unit of measure is. My dad owns a grocery store, but there's basically, really like it's like $1 per square foot or something like that measure that if you're in grocery, you're looking at that constantly and you're trying to,
it's the metric.
It's the one that matters. So,
it makes perfect sense. That's funny. I didn't know that. So,
Red and 5 Hour Energy, I think, was like the next iteration of that, right? Where it's like even smaller,
teeny tiny. Yeah,
you stick it on the counter, and it's same. I don't know I have no idea what the prices are on those things, but I assume it's similar pricing for even smaller footprint. So.
Yeah. The application for D2C, I think, is just the thing that I talk about a lot, and I it comes around a lot, which is like, again, think about how the economics of your business relates to the distribution channel, right? If you can't ship it at a reasonable price, it's really hard to make D2C work, And so a small product where shipping doesn't eat into your margin is a really big deal, unless you want to go be Amazon first. And this is the Simple Modern genius. I've talked to these guys a lot. Like what they realized was that there was a game that Simple Modern realized is there's a game they could play on Amazon specifically, which was by having a lower price but more product options. They built their business for Amazon first in a way that Yeti and whoever else couldn't. And so they went and built a monster Amazon business. And then D2C is actually the back end of that. And so they align the sort of product and the consumer to the distribution strategy, and even the margin profile to the distribution strategy. They purposely took less margin in that business to go be Amazon first. And I think that's what people got to think about is like, does my business make a lot of sense for this channel? And if so, why? And if not, what's the better channel?
I love
that. Okay, I know we're out of time. You also became the CEO of Stamped recently, so we've talked about No. Tell people about that really fast, and then tell people. I used Stamped back in the day when I was at 4x100. I love Stamped.
So very, very quick on that. We sold No Commerce to WeCommerce/Tiny 3 years ago, and Stamped had been purchased the year before. Anyway, the CEO of Stamped, Mike, he's amazing. One of my good friends. And he's leaving to do something else. And so we were looking at like, what does the future look like? And so we decided we're actually going to basically merge No with Stamped. It's still like, it becomes one of the products in the suite. So there's 4 different products now. I'm going to be CEO over the whole thing. And Bar, who's been VP of revenue at No, is going to be GM of No. But yeah, it's cool. I like, when we talk about like the super buyers of products, I think like what I'm looking at is how do we be best in class at what we do individually? And then also like, be friends with our competitors, because there's a world in which like if we can actually like pull all of this stuff together, really pull meaningful insight out of these products, we're actually going to be able to raise the ability for D2C brands to drive incremental revenue for their business. And that's what I'm after. So I'm excited about that whole process. So it'll be fun. Yeah.
This is a good tag for my last bull case for e-commerce point, which is like another thing that everybody underrates, I think, is that smart people like you are doing that. And the way you actually make more money for No and for Stamped is actually by doing the thing you just said, which is that you provide value in excess of your costs by making your product better. And so one of my beliefs about one of the reasons that e-commerce is still going to get better and better is that people like you are building services that accomplish, or software in your case, that accomplish that, and therefore provide additional value. Like, you can't all be wrong. You can't all be extracting more cost, actually extracting more value than you're providing. You can't be. And so this idea that like SaaS companies are out there like sucking the value out of D2C is like totally wrong. What you're actually all doing is trying to solve people's problems, and you'll die if you suck more value out of the cost than, or out of the entrepreneur. So the more that you solve problems like that, the more that e-commerce businesses are going to benefit from it and be able to have bigger and better businesses. So you guys are an important part of the ecosystem. And literally one of the reasons I'm bullish on it is that like there are more people like you doing that who are building really good products. To help.
And I would say to that point, there's a few product categories that became way overpriced, especially during COVID. Reviews, just candidly, is one of those. That's what's happening right now is those reviews, like that category is, at least from like the ability to charge massive prices, is dying. And so that's something I'm really excited to dive in on, is like, what does that look like moving forward? How do we rethink that? How do we make sure that the value coming out of that is far exceeds the price of those things? And so, there's some really cool stuff there that I'm excited to dive into. So,
I love it. All right, man. Everybody should do a couple things here. You should go follow Jeremiah on X and on LinkedIn. The links for those are on the show notes. You should subscribe to this show, of course, while you're at it. Then you should go and install Know and install Stamped and get reviews at a reasonable price, like Jeremiah just said. How much cheaper are you guys than the alternatives here? Like,
on reviews,
is that the way you want to start this for Stamped?
At the moment, we're not. But I'm
okay, great. All right, you bet you're going to be. Okay, great. So keep an eye on that. And then go install Know, ask better questions of your customers, and learn what is propelling them. Jeremiah, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad we got to chat.
I loved that conversation so much. I got so much out of it. You could probably feel my energy in it. I hope you liked it as well. Jeremiah is one of the people in the e-commerce ecosystem who gives so much value in his content that you should be following. So go follow him on X, go follow him on LinkedIn. Links are in the show notes. I mean it. Like, I followed him for a while. He's actually on lists I've created of like people to make sure I don't miss their tweets and those sorts of things. So go do that. Do subscribe to my podcast wherever you are watching or listening to it. I would love for you to do that. There's all kinds of great content coming up, including a bunch more interviews. I mentioned Cuts Clothing on this, one of the big men's basics companies. I've got Sean Crispin, who's been at that company basically from the beginning, talking about their growth, each stage of their business, what it is like to run a $1 million business versus 5 versus 10 versus 50 versus 100, all those things. I think it's going to be really helpful for you to think about which stage of business you're in. This is something I'm really hot on right now. He's an operational guy, thinking about time, systems, those kinds of things. Don't miss that conversation. It's coming very soon. And of course, you can get everything I'm doing at ajfgrowth.com. I have revived my newsletter. It's really simple. I'm just sending out very quickly a short, basic, brief thought each week on something really actionable that you can take with you to make your business better, and then just a couple backwards looking things of any podcasts you might have missed, including links to an episode that maybe is older now that still is really good that you might have missed because if you're newer to me, etc. So it's a good way to kind of stay up on what I'm doing, what's coming, and get a lot of value in your inbox once a week on Mondays. I won't spam you. Also, of course, you can reach out to me, podcast@ajfgrowth.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can also follow me on X at Andrew J. Ferris. Like I said, subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.